Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Abhineet Shukla and with me is R.S. Raghu, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar holds talks with Ukrainian counterpart Dmytro Kuleba. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres calls for access for international inspectors to Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant after Ukraine and Russia traded accusations over the shelling of Europe's largest atomic plant. The US Senate has approved a bill that includes $369 billion for climate action, the largest investment in America's history. Israel begins reopening crossings into Gaza as ceasefire with Palestine holds. China's military says it is continuing large-scale military drills around Taiwan after its previously announced live-fire exercises ended on Sunday. And at the Commonwealth Games, India clinched 4 of a possible 5 gold medals on the final day of the tournament in Birmingham. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar held talks with Foreign Affairs Minister of Ukraine Dmytro Kuleba on Monday. In a tweet, Dr. Jaishankar said he discussed recent developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict and its continuing global repercussions. Dr. Jaishankar assured him that the next consignment of humanitarian assistance from India will reach Ukraine very soon. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres today asserted that the international inspectors to be given access to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant after Ukraine and Russia traded accusations over the shelling of Europe's largest atomic plant. Mr. Guterres said the International Atomic Energy Agency IAEA needed access to the plant. However, IAEA Chief Rafael Mariano Grossi warned on Saturday that the latest attack underlines the very real risk of a nuclear disaster. At a news conference in Japan, Mr. Guterres said that any attack to a nuclear plant is a suicidal thing. He was attending the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Ceremony on Saturday to commemorate the 77th anniversary of the world's first atomic bombing. On Saturday, Ukraine said the Russian shelling had damaged 3 radiation sensors and hurt a worker at the Zaporizhzhia power plant, the second hit in consecutive days on the site.
The first of the ships to leave Ukraine under a deal to unblock grain supplies and stave off a potential global food crisis arrived at its destination in Turkey on Monday, as Russia again accused Ukraine of shelling Europe's largest nuclear power station. The Turkey-flagged Polar Net docked at Danish port in the Gulf of Izmit after setting off from Chornomorsk on August 5th, laden with 12,000 tons of corn. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba tweeted, "If Russia sticks to its obligations, the grain corridor will keep maintaining global food security." The US Senate has approved a bill that includes $369 billion, 305 billion pounds, that is, for climate action, the largest investment in America's history. The authors of the Inflation Reduction Act say it will cut the country's carbon emissions by 40% by 2030. Some households could receive up to $7,500 in tax credit to buy an electric car and $4,000 for a used car. The bill, a key plank of President Joe Biden's agenda, will now be sent to Democrat-controlled House. It is expected to be back there as soon as this week before it can be signed into law by Mr. Biden. With the U.S. midterm elections just 3 months away, the bill's passage will be seen as a boost for the Democrats, the BBC's North America correspondent Peter Barr says. The U.S. has been hit by deadly flooding and wildfires in recent years. In today's Hotspot section, under the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav series, discussion on economic reforms gathering momentum.
Welcome to this conversation with Dr. Arvind Panagaria. He is Professor of Economics and the Jagdish Bhagwati Professor of Indian Political Economy at the Columbia University. More recently, he was the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, and before Niti Aayog, Dr. Panagaria was the Chief Economist at the Asian Development Bank. Welcome, Dr. Panagaria.
Thank you, Siddharth.
Sir, you have been associated with several of the reforms since 2014 in your earlier role as the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, and some of the building blocks were put in place, such as the JAM, which is the Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile network, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, GST, the subsidy reform and also the privatization process. How do you view these reforms?
So let's start with the JAM Trinity. Actually, Aadhaar came first, and that was very important because everybody had to be given an identity. And moreover, this was a biometric identity, therefore it couldn't be forced. Then created these bank accounts, which are known as the Jan Dhan accounts. The objective here was to give a bank account to at least every single household. Mobile, of course, was an ongoing thing. Mobile spread had started and considerably kind of kicked off by the reforms that Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee had done. And during the UPA rule, they expanded at a breakneck speed. So by the time Modi administration came, we had lots of mobiles. So Aadhaar multiplied very rapidly. Likewise, Jan Dhan accounts, there was 1 week during which so many millions of accounts were created that the Guinness Book of Records actually carries that fact. Then there were two very big reforms that were done, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code and the GST reform.
Sir, one of the aspects that you worked on was, closure of 6 public sector companies and the privatization process. In fact, it was the recommendation by Niti Aayog which led to the privatization of Air India. How do you see the pace of the entire process exercise so far?
There were 2 enterprises for which a proposal was floated to rehabilitate them, what we call the renew them or restructure them. And this, of course, involved a substantial expenditure. So we recommended one to be closed down and one allowed to be restructured. And this was done the following week. The Additional Secretary himself came and said, why don't we ask the PMO to consider more generally the closure of 6 units as well as privatization of some of these enterprises. I said, yeah, of course, I'm very happy. I'll support it. Right within a month, we got the green signal. That is how this process was launched. And then we, of course, set up very systematic set of committees. Once we got the permission, we started classifying. There were enterprises that could be restructured. There were enterprises that were too sick to be restructured, so they ought to be closed down. By November of 2016, our first list of recommendations that had been actually approved by the cabinet. By 2017, before I left Niti Aayog, Air India had appeared on the radar screen, and we were asked actually to write the first report on the privatization of Air India, which we did. I'm very pleased to say that roughly pretty much the terms on which we had suggested that Air India ought to be privatized, it was privatized.
Do you think the building blocks are in place for India to take off from the current state of affairs to a bigger economy, one which is more inclusive and which is there for the next 50-100 years?
I'll give you not the full long history, but say starting with 2014-15 under Prime Minister Modi. I think first 5 years, the economy grew about 7.4% on average, so it's a decent growth rate. In the 6th year, which is the 2019-20, we did have a decline, to 4%. So that was the result of the inheritance in the financial sector. A lot of reckless lending had happened over the years. So it was inheritance for the government. And as a result, the non-performing assets in the banks really multiplied and financial sector really became messy. And that was at the heart of this slowdown because credit growth had taken a big beating, and then also the non-bank finance companies came to fill the gap. But then we also ended up with a crisis there with Ireland FS going near collapse. The government had to then come and ensure that it was rescued. So that was the background. But overall, during the first 6 pre-COVID years, the economy grew about 6.8%. That's the average growth rate, with the caveat that actually first 5 years was another percentage point, 7.4%. Obviously, in the COVID year, which is the 2020-21, growth rate did fall. It was a negative growth rate. The GDP actually fell by 6.6%. But then we have bounced back. In 21-22, I think 8.6 or 8.7%. They're bouncing back is solid. Probably, the growth rate is higher than in any other country, and our growth rate is also predicted in the coming year by all the institutions, including the IMF, the World Bank, etc., to be close to about 8% at least. That's where we are. Looking to the longer run, a lot of our reforms we have put in place, and we mentioned these 2, but I would also add very big ticket reforms. IBC, the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, GST. The third, I would say, rationalization of the corporate profit tax. By ending many of the exemptions, almost all of the exemptions, we have brought down the corporate profit tax on manufacturing firm investors to effective rate of about 17%. and on all the other enterprises about to 25%. So we are globally competitive on that dimension. Then labor laws have been really a very serious impediment, and significant labor law reform has happened. Fifth, I would mention this has to do with replacing the Medical Council of India Act by the NMC Act, which is the National Medical Commission Act. Prime Minister blessed it, and now you can see how rapidly the medical colleges have been expanding. And the figures I've checked is between 2010 and 2020. If you look at the seats for medical colleges have been doubled. If we do a few more other things, I have absolutely no doubt that we should grow at least at 8%, and with a few more, I think we can get to 10.
So what would be those set of the missing links, if we could call them, in terms of the future reform areas?
First and foremost, somehow this idea of import substitutions has still kind of remained alive, particularly in our bureaucracy, but also I think among the political class. And so this has gotten traction, and we have gotten into import substitution strategies with time. When you impose tariffs, custom duties, and you make these import competing products more profitable to produce, then capital flows into these goods. Well, it's going to flow into these goods from somewhere else, and that somewhere else is going to be the exportable goods. So supply of exportable goods will decline. Even on the demand side, what will happen, when you raise the prices of imported goods, people start consuming other things. They shift their expenditure to exportable goods. Well, those exportable goods are reduced in supply, so what is left over for exporting is less. So there is no way that you can cut your imports and you will not cut your exports. Conversely, if you think about it, when you liberalize, you're importing more, but you can't import more without exporting more, because ultimately you have to pay for your imports in terms of the foreign exchange. Where is that foreign exchange going to come from? You have to export more. And that is the whole power of liberalization, that you produce more of where you are more cost effective, and where your costs are high, naturally that you allow to be imported. After that, we need to put the financial sector on a stronger footing. Credit growth is very important. Our credit today as a proportion of GDP is only 50%. Has to grow. And for that we need banks to become bigger, more profitable and creditworthy, so that can expand credit. And that really requires also the privatization of banks. Our education system needs to be revamped. Now, higher education today is still operating under a 1956 law, the University Grants Commission Act. I think it's time that we bring in a new legislation. Likewise, in school reforms, many schools which have teacher shortages, but then many schools which have access availability of teachers, they are underemployed, underused, so it has to be reallocation. So these are some of the reforms which we do need to undertake as we go, as we modernize the country.
Sir, do you think that the current model is good enough to deal with the challenge of poverty and with unemployment?
As growth happens, certainly we can solve the problem of poverty through redistribution, because more resources become available for the government, and it can tax people who have more wealth and redistribute it to the poor, and so we can help combat poverty. The really serious, sustainable, rewarding way of reducing poverty is to create jobs that pay higher wages, higher productivity jobs. What is our problem is that people are employed in very low productivity jobs, and therefore very low value added jobs. And what we must do is to change the structure of the economy in such a way that there are more jobs which pay well, which have higher value added, and which are more productive.
So coming to the current economic situation, how challenging is it for India, given that inflation is a global problem and central banks are increasing interest rates and also forcing countries like India to increase interest rates, and there's a flight of capital happening. So how do you see that impacting the Indian economy?
In the short term, there is that challenge. I think, around besides the various macro variables that you mentioned, inflation, capital flight, exchange rate. So there is a bit of a challenge here. Now, let's sort of unpack that a little bit. Our inflation target is 4%, but we allow a band around it of plus minus 2%. Currently, inflation we have is about 7%. But it's not outlandishly so. There's no question we need to bring it into the 6% or below range. There's perhaps still some room. RBI has that. It can make use of it. But I won't be overly concerned, especially when I compare it with the rest of the world. clearly the source of inflation has been largely external. Oil prices went up, particularly after Ukraine-Russia war. Our inflation is also impacted by that. Then also the wheat prices, generally cereal prices had gone up because a lot of the exports that came out of Russia and Ukraine just are no longer coming out. As far as inflation is concerned, I think we can be reasonably optimistic because once the new crop of fruits and vegetables comes in, I'm sure we'll see those prices softening up. Oil prices have softened a little bit. Even cereal prices are showing some signs of softening. So I think we'll overcome that. The fact that the US interest rates are rising and they will still very likely continue to rise, which means that investment into the US bond market becomes much more attractive. So anybody who has investments in India currently, whether in the stock market or in our bonds, that market, they will partially unload those investments, convert them into dollars and take those dollars for investment into the US economy, largely in the US debt instruments. And that of course means that they would liquidate their equities, they liquidate their bonds, they get the rupees. These rupees they want to convert into dollars. So they are selling rupees, wanting to buy dollars. That means that puts a downward pressure on the value of rupee. And it makes dollar more expensive. And this is where rupee begins to depreciate. Now, RBI has the option that it could come in and say that, okay, I don't want the rupee to depreciate. What I will do is I'll use my foreign exchange reserves and at the existing exchange rate, I will sell you whatever dollars you want. So RBI in principle could hold the exchange rate, but it's not a good idea. The RBI should certainly do because you don't want huge volatility in the exchange rate, but some of it should let depreciate. And it is letting it depreciate. So now it has gone to 80 rupees. Very wise decision in my opinion. Because in any case, rupee has been a bit overvalued. When rupee is overvalued, meaning that for any dollars worth of exports, our exporter should be getting 80 rupees, but it gets only 75 because the exchange rate is held at 75 rupees. Similarly, when imports come in, a dollar's worth of imports sell for 75 rupees, not for 80, which is what should be the right price. So it makes our goods relative to foreign goods less competitive than what they ought to be. So some depreciation therefore is called for and the RBI has been correct. And by the way, still our rupee has depreciated a lot less than many other currencies. Even euro, which is a developed country currency and regarded to be a strong currency, has depreciated 11-12% in the last 6 months. So that's a challenge, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that the RBI cannot handle. And after all, we have collected these foreign exchange reserves precisely for these times.
Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure to be with you, Siddharth.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Top negotiators in renewed talks to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal indicated Sunday that they are optimistic about the possibility of reaching an agreement to impose limits on Tehran's uranium enrichment. Russian Ambassador Mikhail Ulyanov told reporters outside Vienna's Palais Coburg 4 days into the talks that we stand 5 minutes or 5 seconds from the finish line. He said there are 3 or 4 issues left to be resolved. They are sensitive, especially for Iranians and Americans, Ulyanov said. We cannot guarantee, but the impression is that we are moving in the right direction. Enrique Mora, the European Union's top negotiator, also said he is absolutely optimistic about the talks' progress so far. Negotiators from Iran, the US and the European Union resumed indirect talks over Tehran's tattered nuclear deal Thursday after a months-long standstill in negotiations. With a ceasefire between Israel and Palestinian militants holding after nearly 3 days of violence, Gaza's Sol power plant resumed operations on Monday as Israel began reopening crossings into the territory. Israel also lifted security restrictions on southern Israeli communities after the Egyptian-mediated truce took effect late Sunday. Fighting abated and war-weary people in Gaza and Israel were left picking up the pieces after another round of violence, the worst since an 11-day war between Israel and Hamas last year. Since Friday, Israeli aircraft had pummeled targets in Gaza while the Iran-backed Palestinian Islamic Jihad militant group fired hundreds of rockets at Israel. Over 3 days of fighting, 44 Palestinians were killed, including 15 children and 4 women, and 311 were wounded, the Palestinian Health Ministry said. Islamic Jihad said 12 of those killed were militants. Israel said some of the dead were killed by rockets misfired from Gaza. No Israelis were killed.
Time now for our Potpourri segment. India's Independence Day is around the corner in a week's time and the nation is rejoicing every moment of celebration. All India Radio organized a jazz band performance by the soldiers or the Himveers of Indo-Tibetan Border Police at its Rang Bhavan Auditorium in New Delhi on Monday. The brave soldiers came out with a series of spellbinding patriotic songs which brought the audience to its feet. It began with a powerful rendition of the national song Vande Mataram. The Vande Mataram at 75 program was organized by All India Radio as part of the Har Ghar Tiranga campaign, which seeks to have the tricolor flying atop every household in India. It generated a high level of enthusiasm among the audience for the patriotic songs presented by Himveers of ITBP. A large number of students along with people from all walks of life attended the event. The flag song Vijay Vishwa Tiranga Pyara had the youngsters as well as the senior citizens on their feet. When the ITBP jazz band team presented the tunes of Ye Bharat Desh Hai Mera, it recreated the aura of patriotism and the values for which our freedom fighters laid down their lives. Prasar Bharati CEO Mayank Kumar Agarwal urged the youth to imbibe the sentiments of patriotism and spread it all over. China's military says it is continuing large-scale military drills around Taiwan after its previously announced live-fire exercises ended on Sunday. The Chinese Army's Eastern Theater Command said that it would practice anti-submarine attacks and sea raids. The earlier 4 days of exercises were Beijing's response to U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island. Taiwan has accused China of using these drills as practice for an invasion of the island. On Monday, Taiwan said Chinese aircraft and ships had not entered its territorial waters, which extend 12 nautical miles, that is 22 kilometers or 14 miles from the coast, during the exercises so far. The US, along with Australia and Japan, have condemned the drills, saying their objective is to change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, the 180-kilometer wide or 110 miles body of water between the mainland and the island.
In Pakistan, unidentified gunmen shot dead 4 people, including 2 police personnel, in an attack targeting a provincial lawmaker on Saturday. Local police told to media that the assault took place in the Maidan area of the Lower Dir district of conservative Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Police said among those killed were the nephew and brother of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf Party lawmaker who was returning home after attending a funeral late Saturday. Another party lawmaker was wounded in the attack along with 3 others and was hospitalized in the provincial capital of Peshawar. No one immediately claimed responsibility for the attack. It has been a remarkable final day for the Indian contingent at the Commonwealth Games. India won 4 gold medals, 1 silver and 1 bronze. With the final day heroics, India finished 4th in the medals tally with 61 medals comprising 22 gold, 16 silver and 23 bronze. PV Sindhu and Lakshya Sen clinched the women's and men's singles titles in badminton to give India a good start. Sindhu beat Canada's Michelle Lee in the women's singles final, while Lakshya Sen defeated Malaysia's Zhayong Ji in 3 games men's singles in badminton. In men's badminton doubles, the pair of Chirag Shetty and Satwik Sairaj Rankireddy then beat England's Ben Lane and Sian Wendy to make it 3 gold medals from badminton. In table tennis, Achanta Sarath Kamal clinched his 2nd gold medal from the games as he won the men's singles final, defeating England's Liam Pitchford. Earlier, G. Satyan won the table tennis men's singles bronze medal. However, the men's hockey team lost to Australia 0-7 in the final to settle for silver.
After 11 days of thrilling sporting action, the Commonwealth Games will come to an end tonight in Birmingham with the closing ceremony. The Birmingham Games closing ceremony will take place at the city's Alexander Stadium, which also hosted the opening ceremony. The organizers have yet to reveal details about the closing ceremony. The CWG closing ceremony is set to begin after midnight tonight at 12:30 a.m. Indian time. The Commonwealth Games closing ceremony will also include the passing of the Queen's baton to the city of Victoria in Australia, which will host the next Games in 2026. Before Victoria in 2026, the baton will travel through all the 72 countries. The container ship MV Rishad Rayyan, which left Syama Prasad Mukherjee Port, SPMP, Kolkata on July 31st on a trail run, docked at the Mongla Port in Bangladesh on Monday. The Mongla Port Authority in a press release said the Bangladeshi flag-bearing container ship is carrying 16.38 tons of iron pipes and 8.5 tons of pre-foam. It anchored at jetty number 9 of the Mongla Port on arrival. This is the first trial run of the 4 trial runs which will be conducted over the next few months towards the full operationalization of the agreement on the use of Chattogram and Mongla Port ACMP for movement of goods to and from India, signed in 2018.
Australian musician Judith Durham, best known as the lead singer of folk music group The Seekers, has died aged 79. Her band solo more than 50 million records and had hits including I'll Never Find Another You, I'm Australian and Georgie Girl. She left the group to go solo in 1968 and went on to release a number of studio albums. Anthony Albanese, Australia's Prime Minister, paid tribute to Durham, calling her a national treasure. Durham was honoured multiple times during her lengthy career, including being awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia, OAM, for services to music in 1995 and the Centenary Medal in 2003.
And now a report from the business desk.
The Sensex rose 465 points or 0.8% to finish at 58,853. The Nifty also gained 128 points or 0.73% to end at 17,525. At the global stock markets, the Asian stocks were trading mixed after strong US jobs data cleared the way for more interest rate hikes, and China reported its export rose by double digits. Japan's Nikkei and China's Shanghai Composite Index both rose 0.3% each. South Korea's Kospi added marginally by 0.1%, while Singapore's Straits Times ended 0.4% down and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index declined 0.8%. European shares were up in the intraday trade. Oil prices dropped to hover near multi-month lows as recession fears hurt demand outlook. The crude prices also fell amid data pointing to a slow recovery in China's crude imports last month. Crude oil prices declined more than 1%. Brent crude was trading at $93.90 per barrel. And in the forex market, the rupee weakened 41 paise against the US dollar. The domestic currency closed at 79 rupees and 66 paise against the American unit. Nishit Kumar for World News, All India Radio.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Washington Post writes, Russia moves towards Zaporizhia referendum, UN seeks access to nuclear plant. The Globe and Mail says, Quebec's nursing homes are betting big on the greenhouse model of long-term care. Will it work, and could the rest of Canada follow? The Guardian reports Kenya election, shifting alliances and economic vote to 4. South China Morning Post reports Beijing says China justified in cancelling defense talks with the US. The Financial Times writes US Senate passes Joe Biden's flagship economic package. The Japan Times reports what it would mean for Japan to downgrade its COVID classification. Dhaka Tribune writes Ukraine bombs key bridge at Russian-held Kherson. Nikkei Asia reports Russian military relies on Western Asian tech components study. A quick look at the headlines once again. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar holds talks with Ukrainian counterpart Dmytro Kuleba. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres calls for access for international inspectors to Zaporizhia nuclear plant after Ukraine and Russia traded accusations over the shelling of Europe's largest atomic plant. The US Senate has approved a bill that includes $369 billion for climate action, the largest investment in America's history. Israel begins reopening crossings into Gaza as ceasefire with Palestine holds. China's military says it is continuing large-scale military drills around Taiwan after its previously announced live-fire exercises ended on Sunday. And at the Commonwealth Games, India clinched 4 of a possible 5 gold medals on the final day of the tournament in Birmingham. And now before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan Vaishnav Jan by artists from Benin. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.